Welcome to Trail and Error, a look at the trail running world from the podium to the pack with your hosts Jay Grady and Tristan Stevenson. We decided to start our own trail running podcast to talk to the people we find interesting in the trail and ultra running world, to find out their highs and lows, their momentous successes and their abject failures, and to perhaps give us all a little bit of inspiration to take on some adventures and challenges of our own. We'll be speaking to runners and athletes, race directors and coaches, sports nutritionists and doctors to get the best out of our own running and hopefully yours too. We hope you enjoy the podcast, and if you do, please hit like and subscribe via all the normal podcast feeds. But for now, let's get on with the show.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Trail and Error. This week, Tris and I are joined by Chris Kelly. Chris, welcome to the podcast.
Hello. Thank you very much for having me. It's a real honour to be on here. Thank you.
Hi,
Chris.
Wouldn't go that far.
It is. Honestly, it is. I'm not making that up.
You've had a pretty amazing year. So for those that don't know who you are, just you're a running coach, you're an ultra runner. Tell us a little bit more about yourself.
So been running for, I don't know, since about 2017. I started running after playing football for many years. Had a couple of hip operations in 2016, and part of my rehab, I just started running.
So when you say a couple of hip operations, you've had both hips replaced?
No.
Just operations?
It was fairly major surgery. I had labral tears and something called femoral acetabular impingement.
Yep.
So I had the bone reshaped, I had the cartilage repaired, I had the labral tears stitched up. They were both kind of injuries from playing football. One went while I was literally waiting for the other one to go to have surgery.
I had a friend who had, I think, what you're describing, and he just recently had an op, and he put it down to martial arts when he was younger.
Really?
Karate, yeah, I think he said, yeah.
That wouldn't surprise me. So you've got a bit of abnormal bone growth on there, which I would have had from birth, and just the twisting and turning of playing football, it's just torn everything up in there, and it was quite a bit worse than they thought it was going to be. So rehab was long, slow, and not ideal. But I had the operations done like 9 weeks apart because I really wanted to try and get back and play football again. And they told me sort of 3 or 4 months, and that turned out to be sort of 12 months and counting really. But I got back playing football, but I started running in that time, and my football manager at the time obviously noticed I was better without a football at my feet. And I went and did a village 10K and then a half marathon, and that was it. And just literally got the bug from there, and it's become my life. So yeah, that's kind of...
As we can tell, this is not a video episode, but you are surrounded by gym equipment. There is a good reason for that. It's not only because running's your life, but you're actually living in the gym at the moment, aren't you?
Yeah, we are. We're renovating our house, which has been dragging on for quite a while. So I've had that going on as well while I've been training. So it's not ideal, but yeah, it serves a purpose at the minute. But I think my wife's desperate to get out of here. For me, I'd live in here anyway, so it's not too bad. But my wife's definitely had enough.
Yeah. Like Jay says, you've had a pretty great couple of years of running. I was actually looking at some of your results and the races you competed in. And I think we have a similar kind of taste for races. It seems like we kind of you've got the Arc of Attrition in there, and then a lot of kind of flat stuff, which I'm a big fan of myself. Well, I say I'm a big fan of it. I seem to keep racing in them, but don't necessarily love them. But you've had some really fantastic results. That's where it differs, of course. You've got a lot of first places there.
Oh, I don't know about that. I don't know if it differs that much. It just depends what happens on the day, doesn't it, really?
Yeah.
But yeah, flat running definitely suits me. I've done Lakeland a couple of times. Once it was... So I actually fractured my pelvis and my hip socket in January 22, I think it was. And then I stupidly ran Lakeland, or was it 23? It might have been 23. And then I ran Lakeland like 9 weeks after getting off crutches. And that was probably the worst 33 and a half hours of my life. It was pretty horrific. And then I DNF Lakeland this year because I knew I had like Albi coming up, and it wasn't pretty, and it doesn't particularly suit my style of running. I live in Cambridge and it's pan flat, and the opportunity to do hills and things around here is pretty non-existent. So that conditioning it's not there for me. I'd have to go away and train quite a lot. So yeah, the flat stuff definitely suits me.
You did all right on the Arc though, 4th place.
Yeah, the Arc went really well. I kind of got back to some fitness, and as you know, you guys know, there's loads of runnable sections on there as well.
Some
So
flatbeds, even.
yeah, some really good flatbeds. So I was kind of able to make up a bit of time that I was losing on the technical bits on that. So yeah, it kind of worked in my favour that. But yeah, that went all right.
Yeah, 20 hours 45 minutes and some. Yeah, that's definitely all right.
Would have been a course record, like 3 years ago?
Yeah, some guy called Derbyshire came along, didn't he?
Yeah, he's a flash in the pan.
Yeah, he's going to burn out soon.
You'll never do it twice, that's for sure.
Yeah, definitely not. Bless him.
Yeah, and I see a Grand Union Canal first place as well, which is quite some feat.
Oh,
yeah.
Oh dear.
We lost you, Joe.
Jay, we're losing you. Are you there?
I am here. I'm somewhere.
Don't create
anyway.
editing work for me. It's going to piss me off. I think we can just about let that one slide. I don't think anyone noticed. Let's continue.
We'll go.
I was going to say, first place on the Grand Union.
Yes, yeah. So that was one of the races I had in, and I'd wanted to do it for ages. And I was supposed to do it the year before, but when I broke my pelvis, obviously that kind of went out the window. So I put in for it again, and then managed to do it this year. It's an interesting race, that one. it's definitely interesting. It's the furthest I'd ever run. I'd done 100 milers before, but this was a bit of a different beast. And
what was so different? Because we've spoke to a few people that have done it, and everybody's come out with something slightly different to each
another
other.
45 miles.
Yeah, that definitely played into it. I'm not going to lie.
Did you think I could have finished now? When you crossed the 100-mile mark, did you think, normally that'd be done, but
yeah, I ran a 100-mile PB for me in that, so I was of like, can I just stop now and jump in the car? My wife was crewing me, and it was like, this is all right. If we can stop here, I'm more than happy. But yeah, that extra 45 miles was, it was a rude awakening, should we say? And also it went from London up to Birmingham this year, and I've not done it the other way, but you hit the trail sections and the overgrown sections in that 45 miles, whereas normally you'd get them done and dusted beforehand.
Yeah.
So I probably wasn't prepared for that. You start off on this lovely towpath in London, and it gets a bit more sort of, overgrown and traily in places, and there are boat ropes everywhere and bits and pieces that you have to avoid. But then, there were certain sections where it was over my head. I mean, I'm not very tall, but it was the weeds were over my head, and it's dark, and the canal was right next to me, and it was a bit like I've got 100 odd miles in my legs here, and yeah, it was a challenge, definitely. But
what was the competition like in terms of? Did you know where second place was, or were you just running your own race completely? And
yeah, I was trying to run my own race. I mean, I had a rough idea, but they don't use open tracking, so it's real, grassroots and sort of back to the old days of how it was before we had trackers and dot watching and all that kind of thing, which I really loved. I loved that about the event. It was really good, but it was obviously something a bit different, because as you know, when you're going along and you've got crew and everything, you can kind of get a rough idea of who's in front, where they are, who's behind you, who's chasing you down. But this was kind of blind, so that was quite interesting. And yeah, I knew at certain points towards the end that I was ahead by sort of quite a distance, which was quite good for me because the last 10 miles were pretty horrendous. I got some fueling wrong. I learnt a lot on that race. I probably overdid the electrolytes. I missed my crew on 3 points during the day and tried to kind of make up for it. And you can kind of get away with that once or even twice maybe. But the third time was kind of the nail in the coffin for me. And I really struggled. I felt pretty sick, and I've never had stomach problems before. So this was all new and something I had to cope with, we got through it in the end, but the last trudge into Birmingham was pretty grim, to be honest. Early hours of the morning, going through the industrial areas of Birmingham.
Oh, lush.
Do they switch the
wasn't it just-
direction each year? Is that how it works?
So they switched it for I think it was it was one of the anniversaries anyway, one of their big anniversaries, and they decided to switch it, and then they've kept it. I think it's been this will be the third year, so this was the second year, and then they're doing it again, London to Birmingham next year. They announced. Whether they switch it back after that, I don't know. I don't know how long they're going to run it for like that, or whether
They're comrade style.
Yeah, that's what I wondered, whether they might do it like that. I don't know what they've got plans for, but yeah, it'd be interesting to give it a go in the other direction. I know that much.
Downhill, right?
I might wait until they switch the direction before I put my application in based on this conversation.
Yeah, someone else I spoke to said afterwards, they were like, yeah, I really enjoyed the race, but I'd never do it in that direction. Now I kind of understand why. So yeah, I might give it a go another way. I don't know, but we'll see.
We interviewed a lady a long time ago called Mimi Anderson. It's a bit of a legend who did. She ran to the start of GUCR and then ran the race.
Seriously?
Yeah, she did it in Badwater as well. She ran Badwater and then ran back to the start of Badwater, which kind of is just mental in my mind. I mean, how people do those. You know, not a 10K run to the back. You know, 140 odd miles.
So, have you got the Thames Path on your hit list?
So yeah, it's definitely one I'd like to look at. I was thinking about possibly doing it next year, but next year's kind of up in the air at the minute with what to do. But that was definitely one that I've got my eye on. I'd like to do.
Yeah, definitely see you.
Yeah, how did you find it?
I liked it. We were quite lucky that year. It was pretty dry. If anything, it was a little bit hot.
I was going to say it was hot that year, wasn't it?
Yeah, but the conditions underfoot were really good, so I was able to do it all in road shoes.
Nice.
There are sections of it where it gets pretty kind of like single track, but none of it's too technical. We also had a fairly significant diversion that year, which ended up taking us up a hill, which became the only hill in the whole race. I mean, the whole thing's kind of uphill ever so slightly, but it's effectively flat.
Yeah.
But yeah, I had a good run that day. It was a good race. But you know, as is the same with any distance, it starts to drag in the last quarter. You know, and you're like,
yeah, of course,
I'll let this thing be over.
It's the nature of the beast, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
I mean, that's one thing I did make a big mistake on at the Grand Union Canal. Is I could have started in road shoes and I started in trail shoes, and I thought I'd get away with it, but actually I could have had a bit of an advantage. I remember standing on the start line thinking, I should have looked at this a lot better than I did, because everyone's there in kind of alpha flies and vapor flies and everything, and I'm looking around and I've got my trail shoes on, and I've got 40 miles of hard compacted, concrete tow path. So that's something, little bits and pieces like that would have made a bit of a difference.
So you didn't do a shoe change at all? You just kept the trail shoes on the whole time?
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
Which
they were fine when it was wet and slippery at the last sections. Sure. They came into their own, but yeah, for those first sort of 40 miles or so, that was a bit of an error, definitely.
Well, I did the whole of the Thames Path in alpha flies, and it was fine that day. Though, I mean, I'm kind of pretty accustomed to running trail in alpha flies. I do it every day. Not technical trail, but yeah, I do it most days. So it's something I'm used to, kind of balancing on those things. Yeah. But
the technology's changing a lot now in the trail shoes, isn't it? I mean, that's coming
true.
Now.
Yeah. It definitely is. Yeah. Cool. So yeah, so maybe Thames Path next year. What else have you got coming up? What else is on the calendar or potential for 2025?
So potentially, I did London for the first time this year, and I might go and do the London Marathon again. I said I wouldn't do it again because it went so well and I enjoyed it so much. But actually, now looking at next year, I'm thinking maybe I could do with doing another marathon while I've still got the legs to do it, hopefully.
Yeah.
And try and maybe PB there. Do a bit more speed in the beginning of the year. But I'm hoping next year, it's kind of up in the air till April, till the selection comes out. But I'm hoping to make the world champs at Albi next year. So kind of my calendar's a bit dependent on that. Really, I've got Cambridge half marathon, 10K, bits and pieces like that, going a bit sort of shorter and sharper. And then kind of try and wait to see what happens before I fill out the rest of the year, really.
Yeah.
That's kind of the plan at the minute.
Because you had a cracking 24-hour race of what, only a few weeks ago, right?
Yeah, it's about 3 weeks ago now, yeah.
How are the legs?
The legs are all right, actually.
That's
the legs are pretty good. They're probably the best they've been after a long race, surprisingly. But again, that's the first time I've done a race like that with road shoes on. So I'm no doubt that's played into it. But yeah, it went well. It went better than expected, definitely.
Yeah, well, it was a very long race. Well, 24 hours, obviously, but you covered a lot of distance there, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. 273.375 kilometers in the end. So yeah,
that's massive.
Yeah, it's quite crazy when you think about it. It's not until you actually look at it afterwards, and it's like, wow, blimey. But
What is that in miles?
I think it's just under 170 miles, 169 point something.
Wow,
which is insane.
Amazing. Yes, I mean you've got to stand a good chance of qualifying for the GB team, right? I would think with that kind of performance.
I hope so. But there's different sort of criteria that they'll select from. Matt Field obviously had an amazing run a few weeks before me and set the British record at Gloucester, and so he's out there way in front at the moment. But I'm sort of second behind him this year, and fourth overall on the all-time list. So yeah, I don't know. We just have to wait and see if I've done enough. I've kind of done all I could do, I suppose. And just wait and find out.
So, kind of talk us through how you got ready for the track event. How do you condition yourself to want to run for 24 hours and just as far as you can? What mentally, physically, what did that look like for you?
So for me, I was coming off, as I said, Lakeland, which I'd had a good training block for Lakeland, sort of in between finishing the Grand Union Canal. Gave myself a bit of rest and got ready for that. On the day, it just wasn't happening for me at Lakeland, unfortunately. So I decided to call it a day, knowing that I had Albi coming up. And then my plan was always to get in and start getting the mileage back up, which for me works well. I like volume. I respond well to volume. So I was doing a lot of that. I got up to sort of 100 miles and then sort of pushed it up from there. Started off with quite a bit of speed work, get the speed in the legs again, and then just sort of bulked it out from there. And then, like for the actual race itself, I was trying to get specificity really in the last few bits. I went over race pace with a lot of my longer runs, just to get that in and build out the volume. I was doing longer runs every weekend, and I was doing them up and down outside my house. So I had a little table outside with what I needed on there, nutrition and bits and pieces.
Someone was telling me about this. How many? Is it a 1 kilometer section or something? And you ran it continually for? Someone was telling me some crazy statistic about your training.
Yeah, there was my neighbours. I mean, they think I'm a bit crazy anyway, but they definitely thought I was crazy after this. So literally outside my house, up to the top of the road, there's a T-junction about, I don't know, 1.3 kilometres away. So I was just doing out and backs on a Saturday for like 4 or 5 hours, just going up and down there, partly for the mental training, and partly because it worked well for replicating the race and getting the nutrition and practicing hydration and all of that kind of thing. So yeah, just did that once a week, and then peppered everything else with sessions and long runs during the week. Yeah, just to build that volume up really, and just doing what I could, and then the recovery, sleeping, eating, all the usual things, just to try and recover from all those sessions.
What's your kind of if you said you had a secret weapon, maybe that you've discovered about recovery, what would that be? Do you think? Because that takes a lot of recovery to get back out on those sessions to get that volume in. What would you say? What's the thing that you wouldn't drop necessarily from recovery?
This time around, it's actually been my sleep. So I've always recovered pretty well. I'm pretty good like that. I eat well, so my diet's pretty good. Um, uh, yeah, and sleep's been the big one for me for this one. I really concentrated on getting enough sleep in, which I've not been so good with previously. But this time I knew I had to get that in, and also my easy runs are really easy. I do plod around a bit, and just keep it really simple and don't push things too much. So yeah, those are the things really that allowed me to kind of get the big sessions in. Yeah, that's what I'd say. And nutrition as well, obviously, sort of in during training, getting the carbs in. So I used to be kind of fairly low carb when I started things out, but I've switched now. I train as much as I can with carbohydrates, and was getting sort of reasonably big numbers in per hour, and that was also aiding recovery as well. So I think that's made a big difference. I know you've kind of switched a bit, Tris, haven't you, or upped it a little bit from where you were?
Yeah, definitely upped it a bit. Yeah. Just I guess when I first started doing it, it was just low carb all the time, if not keto. And now, still a lot of my meals are pretty low carb, just because it's the kind of food that I like to eat. But certainly, I put a lot more carbohydrates into and around my runs these days.
You've definitely found.
But I'm still not up at this sort of like 100 grams an hour kind of level that or 120 grams an hour some people seem to be able to get down them. I'm more like 50, 60, which I think is probably a lot of people sit around that level. Maybe a lot of elite runners sit at a slightly higher level, but for a lot of ultra runners, I guess they're probably around that mark.
Yeah, definitely. Have you found that's helped with recovery as well?
I think with recovery more than anything. Yeah. I don't think it's particularly aided performance. Well, I mean, obviously recovery leads into performance, but I never really suffered that hard from sort of even doing intervals and stuff without taking carbohydrates on before. And even when I do now, I don't think it dramatically changes things. But with recovery, it certainly does. You're just giving yourself that little extra advantage of kind of fueling up the muscles intra workout, rather than kind of waiting till afterwards and then depriving them of that glucose.
Definitely. That's what I've found.
I'm doing the Winter Dance 200 in about 4 weeks, 3.5 weeks.
Is it coming around quickly by any chance?
And a part of that is the South Downs Way, which you've done, haven't you?
It's my first 100 mile of that.
Was it?
I really enjoyed it. It was good fun. It was a steep learning curve into 100 milers. I went off far too quickly. Rich McDowell was running it that year. And I kind of made some sort of silly on the fly decision to stick with him, but keep him within a long range touching distance of if anything happens to him, then I might be there. And I will never forget this lesson that Pete Windross taught me at 80 miles when he came flying up behind me and overtook me. Or no, he didn't even overtake me straight away. He came along and he really politely took out his headphones, ran alongside me for a little bit while I was suffering, and then just went into the distance. And I just watched him go off, and I was like, "That's how you run these things. That's what I should have been doing." So yeah, that was a massive lesson for me, and one I've tried to replicate a little bit, but have never quite got it right. I do like to race, so I find holding off not that easy all the time. But yeah, that was a big lesson. But it's a great course. It's a fantastic course. It's kind of got everything. It's runnable. The hills are runnable to a point. Whether you should run them or not it's a big thing, and I probably should
Yeah.
have walked a lot more than I did. And I absolutely trashed my quads on the downhills as well. I just wasn't conditioned enough for it, and it was a big wake up call. But a great course, and I'd love to do it again one day, at some point.
Yeah, I've not done the South Downs or the North Downs Way. I mean, I think it's probably quite a lot of people's first 100 is South Downs Way. It's kind of considered to be a great entry into it,
Yeah.
isn't it? Because it's obviously got some elevation there, but mostly runnable, as you say, kind of beautiful, fairly easy access for a lot of people in the country as well, being, you know, not too far from London. But never got around to doing it. So now I'm just going to go whole hog and do a load of that, load of the North Downs Way. There's a couple of other trails in there mixed in to join them together, and then loads of darkness and probably some rain.
How much of it is the? I can't remember. How much of it is the South Downs? How much does that cover?
I'm not entirely sure as to what chunks of each one it takes in, but it certainly wouldn't be the whole thing. If you look at it on a map, it basically looks like someone's taken the M25, picked it up, and then plonked it below London and between London and Brighton.
A lot more scenic.
A lot more scenic. Hopefully less cars.
Definitely.
But also more elevation as well.
Yeah. That would be amazing. You'll have a great time, I'm sure.
Yeah, well, they've just done this year they're doing 100 mile as well.
I saw that.
Which I think is an out and back. I might be wrong about that. Yeah, I might be wrong about that. So I'm probably sorry if I am, James. But yeah, that's going to be interesting as well. But 200 miles is uncharted territory for me.
How far have
you
gone?
I've not gone more than 100. So yeah, it's going to be double that, obviously.
You'll be fine. You'll be fine.
Yeah, I mean, it's the interesting one is going to be, of course, the sleep factor, because I've never had to sleep on a run before, and I've never even felt like I needed to sleep or even close to it. Even with the 100 milers I've done, I've sort of finished them and kind of struggled to get to sleep. So as for when that kicks in during the course of this race, that will be interesting to find out, and to then sort of know what that feels like to sleep for half an hour and then try and get up and run again.
Yeah, it's not something I've done before, and I'm not sure how I'd get on with that, if I'm honest with you. I just, the thought of it, sorry, this is going to put you off. The thought of it is not great. And I'm terrible when I don't sleep. I mean, I'm okay for one night, but going into the second night at Lakeland was just, that was not enjoyable at all.
Oh yeah, I guess so. What was that, 33 hours, Lakeland? Yeah, so you're a day and a half at that point, pretty much, aren't you? Yeah, and you've done when you did the Arc, Jay, it was basically 36 hours, wasn't it?
Yeah, pretty much 35. I think I was out for.
That's a lot of darkness for the Arc as well, isn't it?
17 hours.
Yeah.
But you were down to do TDS this year, weren't you? And pulled.
Yeah, I was. So the
Similarly, that's an awful lot of darkness.
Yeah, I can imagine. I pulled out of that because it was obviously post Lakeland and too close to Albi for me. Albi came along as a bit of a late thing following the Grand Union Canal. I was talked into it by Sarah Cameron, bless her, who I met at the Arc this year, and stayed in touch with her because we got on really well, and they've got a few things in common, obviously hip injuries and bits and pieces like that. And Sarah spoke to me after the Grand Union Canal and said, I live out this way. Do you fancy coming out and doing Albi? And it'd never crossed my mind before. So she's to blame for this. I'm holding her responsible. And she really kindly crewed me as well at the race, which, going back to Albi, I wouldn't have got through that race without her. The expertise and everything that they brought in as crew. So I had my wife Kelly crewing, Sarah and Sophie Bennett as well. And the three of them just kept me going throughout the whole thing. And her experience was just, it was priceless. It was absolute gold.
How did that manifest? What was she actually? Could you quantify where her experience became beneficial? What parts of it
Just just the little bits of advice, and it's the tiny bits and pieces. And having been there before, seen it before, and bringing that experience to it. There were times where my watch was having me so far ahead, I couldn't tell where I was GPS wise and that kind of thing. And the whole experience was all new to me, obviously, with that format. And she just brought this calm head to it all. And no nonsense of there's a gel, get it down you. And I just did as I was told, and kind of let her crack on. And we communicated really, really well. So when I wasn't feeling great, I'd let her know if we needed to change things on the fly. She knew what I was talking about. Because it's not very easy when you're going down that home straight. You think you're going to have a bit more time than you are. So just that level of expertise and having someone there who's been there and done it before, it was just priceless, as I say. Just the little tips and tricks and things to tell me at the right time and to push me on and get me going. It was brilliant. I couldn't have done it without her, or without the others. To be honest, it was a massive team effort.
How did the if you're going to sort of dissect the race apart, how would you kind of describe each sort of section of it? Like, the first 12 hours, the last 6, where were the sort of highs and lows and that kind of thing?
So it took me about an hour or so to really get into it. So when we went out on the Wednesday. We flew out to France on the Wednesday, and we drove from. It was an evening flight, and we drove from Toulouse over to Albi, which is about an hour. And then getting to our Airbnb, it was quite late by the time we got to bed. So I didn't sleep that night, and then our Airbnb wasn't fantastic. We'll ignore the 77 steps up to it. It was a bit of a shock being on the 4th floor.
Nice views, though.
What was that, sorry?
Nice views, though.
Yeah, the views were lovely. It gave me something to look at when I was laying in bed afterwards. But yeah, so I didn't sleep that night either, and then you never really sleep well the night before. So the first 3 or 4 hours, I was absolutely knackered. My eyes were closing on me, and I was already thinking that I needed to take some caffeine in at that point, which was way ahead of where I wanted to be. So it took me quite a way to settle, but once I got settled in, probably 6 hours, everything went fairly well nutrition wise, and everything like that, and that carried through for the next 6. Really, there was a bit in between, where I was kind of losing a little bit of pace, and I was starting to not quite understand where I was in the field and what was happening. I was obviously running my own race, but there were 3 other races on as well at the same time. So they had 100k and a 6 hour. So you weren't quite sure who was in which race if you couldn't clock the bib. And there was a guy that went off, French guy that went off, and he lapped me about 5 or 6 times, I think, in the first few hours. So I just kind of had to just sit in and let him do his thing, and just concentrate on my own race. So we kind of dipped a bit going into the night, but I got a bit of a second wind after that, and managed to pull things through. The carbs dropped off a bit over the night as well. I had a few little stomach issues, nothing major, but just stuff that we had to change on the fly. So that kind of hit it a bit, and then managed to finish off really strongly. There was a Latvian guy there who we kind of got into a bit of a battle with. He was kind of clocking me, and I was clocking him as we were going round and looking at each other across the track. And I knew kind of at some points he was gaining on me, and then I managed to lap him about 4 times in the end and took second place. But then he started to come back again, so it was quite nice because I had someone to kind of push yourself along with. And then it was all about, from there, it was the final hours was all about, right, how far can we go? And that's obviously where Sarah came in massively at that point as well, because then that's where she's coming in and saying the right things at the right time, and getting information to me about when to push and what to do. And we managed to close it out all the way to the end and finish quite strongly.
So I'd always imagined with these things that, especially with the one that I crewed for Triss, that you just go around the oval. But at Albi, you don't, do you? It takes a slight deviation.
Yeah, it does. It's not all done on the track. It's a 1.5 kilometer loop that takes in most of the track, and then you go out from the track again. You go round the back of the stadium. Then there's another sort of football pitch stadium out the back of the main stadium, and you go around that as well. And then you come back around the main stadium, one of the other stands on the other side to the home straight, and come back onto the track, and then do a loop of the near enough a loop of the track again before you go out. So then you pass your crew at that point. So you're seeing your crew kind of every lap. Every sort of works out to be, I was running between sort of 7.5, 8.5 minutes, something like that, unless we stopped. So it worked out quite well and quite nicely like that.
And you don't do a direction change
No,
on
it's
that?
all the same direction. So you just keep running in the same direction.
But then you've got those turning both directions kind of thing. I guess you're still turning more one direction than the other, but still at least you're getting some left turns in or right turns in.
Yeah, there is a bit of variety in there. I had a bit of problems with my right ankle, and turning one of them was quite a sharp turn around the back of one of the stadiums. If you're trying to take the racing line, so that caused a bit of a problem, because the majority of it was turning right, but there were a few left hands chucked in there as well to give it a bit of variety. So it kind of mixes it up, and also I suppose I've not done a track 24-hour, but you obviously get a bit more space, because I can imagine it gets a bit chocker on the track when.
Yeah, I mean, the two track events I've done have both not been particularly highly participated, so it wasn't really too much of a consideration. But you do see some of these track events where there's a lot of people on track.
Yeah.
You know,
I'm not sure. I'd like to give a track one a go, and see what the difference is like. But yeah, it was. I think it suits me being not on the track and a 1.5 kilometer loop. Gives you a little bit more to look at as well mentally, I suppose.
Definitely that. Yeah, I mean, God, it gets repetitive on the track, and also you're really getting into you're constantly looking at other runners, whereas when you've got a bit more variety and distance and sort of blindness from what other people are doing, then I imagine it means you can sort of get into your zone a bit more.
I think so. And that kind of played out as the race went on, because obviously people drop, or and it spaces out a bit, or people go off and have a sleep and things like that. So you do kind of get a bit more space and a bit of time to yourself, which I quite enjoy. I quite like running on my own, and just being in my own zone. So yeah, that kind of works pretty well for me.
Cool. So you mentioned a bit about sort of changing things on the fly, like when things weren't working, food, carbohydrates, whatever. Can you say anything more about that? Like what wasn't working? What did you change?
So basically, we started off, and I was trying to take in some solid fuel, as much as possible. So I had practiced up to kind of sort of 4, 5, 6, 5 hours, I think was my longest run. Taking on some solid fuel alongside gels and bits and pieces as well. And it kind of got to the point about 7, 8 hours where I was starting to feel I needed to switch things up, and gels were kind of the way to go. So we did that. There was a point where my stomach got a bit gripey, so we had to just knock it back a bit.
What, feeling sick or not, or being sick?
I
Or?
just a bit of cramping in my stomach,
Right.
after a few hours. So I kind of backed off everything for a little while and just took the gamble just to not take anything on. And then at the Grand Union Canal, I overdid as I alluded to earlier, I overdid the electrolytes when I was trying to catch up on things, and I could feel that coming into play again. So we decided to just knock that on the head, and then little bits and pieces like Sarah brought along some soya chocolate milk, which went down pretty well. Just little things like that we were changing and kind of went off script a little bit. That was always the thing for me going into this, is you can practice so much up to 4 or 5 hours in training, and it was always there are so many variables in 24-hour running, and if you don't get the nutrition right, and if you don't change things on the fly at the right moment, it can be game over. So it was just those little things they might seem really minor, about just not trying to push through on something, or just tweaking, the carbohydrate, because I was taking on like carbohydrate drink mix as well, and maybe just tweaking that down a little bit so it wasn't quite so strong. Chucking in some tailwind, because we had some tailwind there at the right time, because things were getting a bit monotonous food wise. Just little things like that we were just kind of making up as we went along. We went as far as we could on the plan, and then it was kind of just talking to each other on the way around and just trying to work out what was best. And Sarah reading my mind.
So you didn't really do much solid food in the second half of the race?
Hardly any at all. No, yeah. I was doing precision gels, chews, carb mix, mixing that up a couple of times with some tailwind, pH 500 for the electrolytes, and mixing that in. And then when that got a bit much, it was just plain water. We just went on to some plain water. I was worried that I wouldn't be able to take on the gels in the way I did. But I think the first half of the race actually set me up quite nicely to be able to switch over to that. I kind of got enough solid fuel in to kind of last me throughout, and then switching to the gels just worked really well. And you know what it's like. It gets to the point where you'll take on whatever you can take on, and that can change from race to race. I've been to some events, and it's like, no, I'd take pizza with me and pineapple and whatever you fancied on the last one, and you get there and you're like, no, don't want any of that. don't ever show me another bit of pizza ever again. I don't fancy it. But what I do fancy is this, and it's like, that's not happening because there aren't shops there. But there you go. So yeah, just making it up on the fly, really.
I've got a question for both of you, actually. If you had the option, so I was watching one of the tours, the cycling tours this year, and the riders were wearing Super Sapiens patches, the Abbott's patches on their arms, and I suspect they've got the biometric vests underneath as well. So the cars were coming up when the riders were glucose depleted, and they were handing them bottles. So they were taking the guesswork out of fueling effectively. If you had, so aside from the ethical part of that and whether that really is, because there's a whole thing about how much within cycling now, what would you class as doping and what wouldn't you? And then that's aside from the chemical side of things, but what's true cycling and what isn't true cycling? Take that element out of it. If you had the option during one of these big events to have more biometric data, A, would you want that? And B, how much would you trust it, do you think?
That's a really good question.
If somebody came out and said, Chris, you need to take this now, and you weren't feeling it, would if you had the sensor on your arm, I guess it would be a calibration thing. You'd get used to it and you'd trust it eventually, like heart rate monitors and stuff. But
yeah, I think so. I think intuition comes into everything massively, and you can have all the data you want, but actually, if you know something's not right, one piece of data is just one piece of data, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And it might be saying that, yeah, you can take that on and you should take it on, but there are other variables and nuances that come into play there, and that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to work out right. And I think I'm quite intuitive with my training, so I don't plan, unlike athletes that I work with, I don't plan my training out in the same way. I do a lot of it off what I feel like in the morning. I know I've got a rough plan of what I want to do and that kind of thing. And that skill comes into racing as well. And I think that the people who are intuitive and can read their bodies quite well often do better in situations like that. I don't know if you find that as well, Tris.
Yeah, well, I'm the same as you. It seems like we've got quite a lot in common here, except you're faster than me. I'm the same. I have a rough plan on the week, but it goes by feel on the morning of the run as to what exactly happens. It's not too regimented. I know some people are like, oh, I've got to do 12 miles, not 13.
Yeah,
and that kind of thing. That's not me. But going back to what you were saying, Jay. I mean, I think data is always good, but it has to be sort of balanced with like real world
feel. And if the data is good, then it's going to just support the way that you feel in terms of, like you say, blood glucose or lactate. I think they're measuring that on the cyclists as well, are they not?
It's part of it.
Yeah. So, I do like data. So, I think it's always cool to see it, especially if it's live data. And I think from my own point of view, I'd love to run a race like that and try it, see what it's like based purely on data. It's like, right, you need to drink this now, you need to eat this now, we need to lower your salt by 20%, etc., etc. And see what happens, see if you still end up feeling sick or whether you feel incredible the entire time or it's somewhere in the middle.
Yeah. It would definitely be an interesting experiment.
Yeah, and the track's the way to do it, because it's such a controlled environment, track or treadmill. Because that would be interesting.
And I know which one I'd prefer as well. I don't know about you guys, but I hate running on the treadmill. I can't stand it.
Yeah. Do you know what? I think it's one of those things where if you do it a lot, you can kind of learn to love it in a weird sort of masochistic way. I, many years ago, I used to do quite a lot of treadmill stuff when I was traveling a lot. And I was in a city I didn't know. These days, it's the complete opposite. It's like, right, now here's a chance to get to know the city. I'll go out for a run. But back then, I used to go in the gym and use the treadmill a lot, and I actually quite enjoyed it. And it was partly because of the data. Of course, these days you got that data on your watch, haven't you? So you don't. Don't need a treadmill to know what pace you're running at or whatever, your heart rate.
I did use the treadmill in the build up to Albi. So I did a bit of heat training. And just got on the treadmill to do that.
Yeah, that'll do it.
but didn't enjoy a single one of them. I mean, you're never going to really enjoy heat training properly. It's just one of those things that's not that enjoyable. But yeah, definitely on the treadmill, it added another dimension to it. It's just not something I enjoy doing. But it's kind of a needs must.
Yeah, they're really noisy as well, aren't they? Like you get on it, it's like pounding kind of sound and the running of the motor, and you've got to turn your headphones up to max in order to sort of drown it out, And the fan that they put on it is never ever gonna kind of simulate, running 4-minute kilometer pace.
Definitely not.
Air in your face. So it is a sweat fest unless the gym's very, very cold, which it never is. No. So yeah, no, I'm not a great fan either. I just I do recall a time where I sort of had some kind of love-hate relationship with the treadmill, but now it's just hate.
Good man.
Yeah. Chris, that's been fantastic. Thank you very. What an insight into. I just worked out 182 laps you did at Albi, give or take.
Was it really?
Yeah, 182 circuits,
Cool.
which is insane.
Wow.
I have to say.
Yeah, incredible.
Yeah, amazing feat, mate.
Thank you very much. It's very kind of you.
But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see where you go after this in terms of maybe that return to Albi and see if that knowledge has come in. You can never bank on one performance leading to another, can you? But it must have given you so much knowledge. Like you say, you got it from Sarah, and that kind of came into play. But now you've got that knowledge as well. So yeah, it'd be really interesting to see where it is next.
Yeah, definitely. I'd like to get the chance. We'll see what happens. I think the big thing for me for next year is kind of being able to back it up, and it not just being a one-off. Just prove to myself,
Yeah, but I mean, 182 laps, that can't be a one-off.
I hope not. You never know. You never know. Things can happen.
Mate, that was brilliant. Well, good luck with everything you've got coming up. You're not doing the Arc this year by the sounds of things, so we won't see you down this neck of the wood come January, but...
No, I am down to do it, but I don't think that's going to happen, unfortunately.
Are you down to do it, are you?
I am on the list. My name is on there.
Okay.
There might be a trip down there.
Do you not fancy the 25 miler, just as a little outing?
I'd love to do that. I love running around there. It's awesome. It's such a beautiful course, and it's just such a beautiful part of the country. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm just kind of just taking things easy at the minute. I obviously put in before Albi, so that kind of wasn't the plan. But yeah, things are a bit up in the air now. But hopefully if I come good, I might get down there.
Yeah, well, fingers crossed. Shout us if you do.
Yeah, we'll do. Definitely.
You can go out for a run with Tris, not me. I'll drive the car or something.
Yeah, I'll go out for a run with you.
I'll drag you both out. We'll both get out. All three of us get out there.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
All right.
No, thank you.
Thanks a lot,
Appreciate
Chris.
your time.
Very much for having me. Thank you.
Cheers, mate. Take care.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Trail and Error podcast. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, subscribe, and most important of all, share it with your friends and your family. Also, if you have any guest suggestions or suggestions for features that you would like to see on the Trail and Error podcast, please get in touch with us via our social media channels at trail_and_error_UK. It makes more sense when it's written down, I promise you. Oh, and we're on Facebook too. See you next time. Thanks for listening.